Yeah, you just do a lot of thinking, and I think you get exposed to a lot of ideas. And what I like about, the way I like to look at the ideas is not just the ideas themselves, but also the process by which this kind of dialectic, if you're familiar with that word, the critical thinking, the dialectic, it's not just one way of thinking about the world, but it's kind of the clash of ideas. And it comes from first of all, you're already by definition speaking several languages. It really shapes your brain that way, as you probably relate to that, because the way you think about, like in your particular case, you think in Vietnamese and you think in English, and you can see that these are not overlapping systems. There are lots of opportunities. So for people who speak several languages, and lived in different cultures, I think that's kind of an analog way of experiencing this diversity of ideas, diversity of concepts, diversity of tools. I'm not a polyglot, but I speak several other languages, and right now I'm kind of working on my Spanish. It's really interesting, even though I don't have the time, but I have I have a coach or a teacher who I meet regularly and talk to her in Spanish.
Here's a metaphor that is often used by people in ACT, right? Imagine that you have a party. You're having a party at your house, and it's going to be a lot of good friends, probably 20 people or more, and you've laid out the food and the drink and so on, and everything's really nice and so on. And the party gets going, and people are having a good time, and there's a knock on the door, and it's this person that is a neighbor of yours who you really don't like, and who is kind of nasty and smells bad. I mean, they don't have good hygiene and so on, right? And they want to come in, right? And you don't want them to come in. So you could stand at the door and keep that person from coming in, but you're not at the party. Isn't it possible, however, that you could let that person in, and you could say, here's some things to drink, here's some food, have a good time and so on. And that you could welcome that, and even though you don't like the idea, you could welcome him in, right? And so it's sometimes been called the bum at the door, right? Okay. So, but there's a sense in which if you don't like the fact that this person is here, well, that's just another bum at the door, and you can welcome that in too. So you can just accept these things, and without having to struggle with them, without having to get rid of them. At a minimum, if you accept the fact that this person is there, and you accept the fact that you're unhappy about that, you could go about your business and enjoy people, and maybe bring this person involved, and maybe find out that this person is a decent person, or maybe just because you did something compassionate to that person, you will feel better. Absolutely. So there are a lot of reasons that, but reason, so often we think of reasons as, well, I did this because of that, right? Well, there's a lot of research that shows, no, you did that because you wanted to do it, and then you came up with a reason to make, as an excuse to why you did it, right? And so you can put your reasons aside and just choose to do what's important to you,
Okay, yeah, I would say, if I was summing up all of this kind of stuff, I'd say stay away from negative people who are glass half empty types. Stay with people who have their glass half full. The world they're thriving, they're nice, they're kind. Be with kind people. Be kind yourself. Learn about your negatives. change them as much as you can. Go get social support and get feedback from the people that matter to you and who you value and trust in life. I think if you did a lot of that if you did that kind of thing, you learn more about yourself and you are prepared to change as much as you can, because there's some bits of us which are very difficult to ever change. They come from a place which is hard to reroute somewhere into different kind of behavior, but you can adapt, even if it's temporary. I think all those things would lead to you being wiser. And as you go older anyway, I think you realize that life is too short, that life is a one-act play. It ends. And as you get older, you say to yourself, no point in being angry with X. Doesn't do X any good. It doesn't do you any good as a person. So either don't be with X and just be with the people who really matter and who value you and you value them. So I think, this is a very big philosophical thing you're getting at when you're talking about wisdom and what you learned from being with other human beings. But as you get older, I think the good news is you begin to look at what really matters and the stuff that's peripheral to your life and to living, and that actually damages you and doesn't grow you. It doesn't enable you to flourish. You leave by the wayside as you get older. You say, because you're saying to yourself, life is getting increasingly shorter as you get older. Therefore, it actually sifts out it begins to sift out all the negative bits of your life. I think that's really healthy in a way. Getting old is lovely in a way, because you don't have to worry about everything as much, because you realize your time is more limited.
When you think about those 5 people who would help you even before asking what do you need help with, and you think about what they would think or say if they found out you needed help and you didn't ask them, they would be thinking, why didn't you ask me? I am here for you. You've helped me so many times. This is my opportunity to give it back to you. You shouldn't have to do this alone. Why suffer and struggle when you don't have to? So we ask people to adopt the mindset of their helpers. And when you adopt that mindset, you realize that people are wanting and waiting to help you. The people that you would ask for help hopefully will not judge you negatively for asking, but in fact, will consider it flattering. Whenever anybody asks me for help, I am flattered that they ask me. That doesn't mean that I always can or should say yes, but I've never been insulted that somebody thought I could be helpful to them. And so it takes a little bit of trying on some new mindsets to help rechannel those neural pathways to get brave. It's really brave to ask for help. It's really going against our culture of what we've come to believe makes somebody successful. And it is entirely necessary for us to get better at anything.
Pause and think before you speak. I'm a big fan of Roshi Joan Halifax, who's a Buddhist monk in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Amazing person. She has something in her book that she basically says the 5 gateways of speech. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it beneficial? Is it necessary? Is it the right time? So when you feel yourself getting tense, stressful, this person doesn't know what he's talking about, I don't like this, this is, feeling negative emotions that you're going to spew out at people, is it necessary? Is it beneficial? Is it kind? Is it true? Is it the right time? It only takes you like 1 minute to say those 4, 5 words. Is it true? Is it kind? And that slows the body down. That slows the mind down. That slows the ego down. Because our ego, the purpose of our ego Our ego wants us to understand that it controls what we do in our mind. So we have to shut the ego down to be quiet in order to get to the quiet mind.
So I guess I've been defining it in terms of the method, so being someone else, being somewhere else, or being sometime else. But really, it's seeing yourself from a distance. So here's the thing: we normally view life from this self-immersed perspective, where my default lens is me here and now. So I'm looking at this screen out through my own eyeballs. I mean, obviously, in a way, but I'm interpreting everything relevant to this entity that is me, that is a fixed entity. And so everything has to pass through that filter. What I want to do is I want to step outside of that entity. And I want to be somebody else, looking at me as though I'm somebody else. Here's a quick, easy way to think about it. So, you know how a friend's telling you a problem or an issue that they're dealing with, and it's so much easier to see the issue when a friend's telling you about their story. You know, but if you're trying to make sense of your own situation, it's a lot harder sometimes to see it as clearly. It's easier to see a friend's problem than our own problem. It's easier to see a solution for a friend than it is to see our own solution, because we get in our own way. And so psychological distancing is this mental manipulation where we exit our immersed self and we take on a distanced self perspective. And the thing I really love about this is I have the best information for my own problems and my own challenges and the things I'm trying to decide. I have the most information out of anybody. For trying to make my own decision, I have the most information out of anybody. But I also have the most blinders on. I also have the most distorted view of it all. And so if I can exit my self-immersed perspective and see that situation from a distance, now I A, have the best information, and B, I've stripped out those blinders. And it sounds like maybe, you know, hocus pocus, is this really true? But I challenge, like, here, all someone has to do. So if you journal, I don't know, do you journal at all?
Sometimes, yes.
Okay, yeah. So if you journal, if somebody journals, usually, like, when you're journaling, it's like, well, I went to the store today, or I'm trying to figure this out, or I had a wonderful day, or my kids did this, or blah, 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 blah. That's all in the first person. Just switch it to the third person. So for me, it'd be like, you know, Mike is trying to figure out what to do with this thing he has coming up at work. Or Mike's trying to decide, you know, what kind of new car he should get because his current one has 180,000 miles. Or, you know, or he, you know, so instead of I, me, my, change it to your name and he or she or they or whatever the case may be. And it just pops you out of this first person perspective and kicks you into this third person perspective. And you have less anxiety. You can see more clearly. A lot of these self-serving biases, fundamental attribution error, confirmation bias, these things go away and you just see the situation more clearly.
One way that I've been trying to think about this, to sort of expand my ability to think, is truly to slow down. I have. This is really advice that's come from one of my favorite collaborators, Cassie Holmes, and it's work that other people have talked about as well. But, you know, making time for deep thinking, you know, versus sort of fast thinking, if you will. There are a lot of things that pop up in my everyday life that seem urgent, and I can sort of, you know, do quick responses to, and I often have to stop myself from, you know, just digging into the urgent and slowing down so that I have the ability to actually think and, you know, to your quote, expand my ability to do that. And it's hard. It's really hard because, you know, I feel like when you get to a certain point in life, it's like I've got little kids and I've got my work and family and, you know, there's so many different things going on that it's easy to kind of do like a little bit here and there, a little bit there, and you know, and I have to keep reminding myself to sort of slow down and try to just focus on one thing, because that results in deeper, you know, more expansive thinking, if you will.
Nature, you know, you hear about it as nature versus nurture. There's no versus, it's and. Nature and nurture, and it's interactive all the way up. And that's what we really focus on trying to make clear in the textbook, which is published by Cambridge University Press. It's called Fundamentals of Developmental Cognitive Neuroscience. So developmental cognitive neuroscience is basically the cognitive neuroscience of infant, child, adolescent development, right? So how the brain changes in those first 20 years. I mean, it goes into the 20s, and you could look at aging as well, but that's generally not considered part of the developmental cognitive neuroscience domain. So nature and nurture, I would say I have a mix of stubbornness and curiosity that kept me going. And so there's a fair amount of what you might call nature, but then nurture, obviously, my parents let me kind of find my way quite a lot. They weren't telling me. You know, I get a lot of students here at UC Merced, their parents, their first generation college students, their parents have told them, you need to be an engineer. You need to be a doctor. Nobody told me anything like that. And I find it, sometimes it works for the student, but a lot of times it constrains their ability to find out what is naturally attractive to them, you know? So that's one of the things we try to do, is to get students, and that's what general ed requirements are for, is to get students to go outside of the lane a little bit. But to get back to your question about nature nurture, the field of developmental cognitive neuroscience, developmental neuroscience in general, is really focused on the idea that you can't pull these things apart. You cannot. It's you know, you've got the basic biology, but from even before conception, the environment has influenced the genetic specificity within an egg, a sperm, and so already environment is having an effect. Now, it's pretty clear what's going to happen once you have an egg and a sperm united. There's a pretty canalized developmental route, but, right, we know all sorts of things happen in utero, and even that is influencing a child's subsequent development. So one of the classic findings from the infant speech perception literature is that you can test a newborn on the language their mother speaks. Like, so they've been in utero, they're hearing, say, Japanese. It's a Japanese mom, they're in Japan, they're hearing Japanese. You test them, compare Japanese and French, for example. And the baby that was exposed in utero to Japanese will prefer Japanese at birth, and vice versa with French. Why would that be? Well, because the plasticity is already happening in utero, and the uterus passes sound through it. It's like basically a high pass filter, right? So a low pass filter. So you're letting the low frequencies through, and the wall of the uterus is blocking the high frequencies. So what does that sound like? It's like being in an apartment with thin walls. And what do you hear when the music from the neighbor is going really loudly? You don't hear the lyrics, you hear the bass. And so what babies are experiencing in utero is the rhythm of the speech. And they can, once they're born, they get the full range of high to low frequencies, but that bass has already shaped their brain to prefer that. Yeah.
Wow.
So the rhythms of the languages distinguish them, right? And the baby's already going, oh, I like this one. Now, does that mean they're never going to be able to learn French if they were exposed to Japanese? No, that's what's amazing, is that they could go any which way, but there's an upper limit to that. And then it becomes second language learning, and it's harder, and there's an accent, and, you know, so on, all the things.
Wow.
So how did I get interested? I don't know. I guess I just told you the story.
As you get older, uh, I don't know if you notice that in yourself too, but like you feel like certain things repeat themselves, and they're just like you start recognizing patterns.
Yep.
And so that type of insight's like, oh, okay, that too will pass. That's okay. That's happened before. Just let it go. They say not worth fighting, right? So those type of things, and sort of that type of recognition, they do come to some extent with experience, but of course, not everybody recognizes those repeated experiences. I started recognizing it recently. I mean, I think like maybe in the last 3-4 years. So I think that helps my thinking. Those type of notions of insight, figuring out how to pick your fights, so to say, what to engage in, what to sort of let go, where to direct your attention and your energy, and where to just step back and let other people handle it. Like also this kind of insight that I mean, it's very trivial, but sort of like it will work out. You don't have to sweat every single thing. It's like the small things, it will work out. I mean, I used to be like, I need to be obsessing about everything because I want to make sure that it's up to highest standards and everything. But I was like, no, just let it go. I mean, it will be fine. So that doesn't really improve my thinking, I think, but it does free up resources to focus on thinking about other things. Because it's like unfortunately everything takes time, and every time you have a trade-off in terms of a temporal trade-off. You either focus on this or you focus on something else. And I think like a lot of sort of ways to improve your thinking is to deliberately figure out what you should or should not be focusing on to channel your attention. And I think, yeah, that's sort of like one strategy. I mean, the other one is have a routine and good habits. I mean, I'm very bad at that. My wife tells me all the time. But, you know, like getting regular sleep, go to bed around the same time, not to overdo anything that you like. It's a very trivial thing, like, you know, like moderation to some extent. It doesn't mean abstinence from everything, but those type of routines and moderation and good habits, they improve your cognitive health as well. They maintain they keep you sharp and not overly fatigued. Anyways, so those are a few things, and exercising, I guess. I mean, that's like again like trivial things. I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think some scholars would say that, you know, either in mindfulness or in this kind of stoicism, sort of you have this approaches where you really spend a lot of time sharpening your reflective abilities. I don't know if that's necessarily the only path to it, because I mean, again, like we talked about context specificity. I would say that in some situations you probably just want to sometimes go outside and be with friends and then go engage in some kind of stimulating activity and close your computer and just do something fun and exciting together. All of those things can in turn have benefits for your cognitive health as well.
Yeah, I think when we're little, we think things like, you know, I want a big car, I want a mansion. We think in terms of things. And I think it's helpful to think in terms of how do I want to feel? What kinds of things do I want to be doing with my time? So do I want to be working in my head at a desk like a programmer or like a writer? Do I want to do that kind of more solitary work day to day? Do I want to be out working with other people? Do I want to be traveling? Do I want to be spending time with people I've never met before and constantly challenging myself in different ways? Because if you're a coder or you're a writer, you're challenging yourself too. But kind of to what degree do I want novelty in my life? To what degree am I willing to do the same kinds of things, or do I get bored? I get bored. after a few years, I feel like I've got this. I know I want to move on. I want to do something else. And my life shows that. Whereas for other people, they want to go into something, learn it, and then keep doing it. And they're good. That doesn't work for me. It works for other people. So I think figuring out those parts of how you want to live your life, that's more important. And unfortunately, we don't get taught that explicitly. I think in some ways, we get exposed to that kind of information a little bit in school, but I think there are ways of thinking, what kind of life do I want to lead? How do I want to live? And then finding out other options, not just from movie stars or people on the news, but from other people who are really living their lives in ways that we might be able to learn from. I think I've been doing a lot of the things I've been talking about. I've been continuing to read. Love reading and love learning about other possibilities of lives, whether it's science fiction or a biography or anything in between. I have continued to meet people and travel. I think that is one of the really important ways to help see the world in a different way and see different parts of the world and see how other people live and then talk with them about what's important to them. And I know it's a privilege to be able to travel a lot of different places, but as long as I can, I want to keep doing that. And then I think joining some groups like Toastmasters, which is public speaking group, really got a lot out of that. And going every week and hearing people's speeches about what's important to them in their lives. It's almost like a storytelling group in some ways that gives an opportunity that I think is kind of rare. We don't get that very often. So choosing to do that and to listen to other people's stories and to tell my own story or to give my own speech, whether it's a story or not, that's another really wonderful way to get insight into other people's lives and about what's important to them in a way that helps me reflect back on what's important to me.
Thinking is a muscle, and muscles develop and stay strong when they're exercised. I share your view that we as a society, in general, spend less time thinking because we are consumed by short-termism and short attentions. Now, that is not universally true, and there is some great thinking, and there are some amazing thinkers, and more of us, because there are more people on the planet, are doing thinking and contributing to human thinking. But for the average person, finding time in our day when we can exercise the thinking muscle is part of that process. Secondly, exposing ourselves to new and controversial stimulates our thinking. And thirdly, thinking in a critical way about the material that we're being exposed to will help us to build and to maintain the thinking muscles that we have. So let me just go and talk about each of those points. Too often we spend our time watching television, engaging in social media, and there is very little thinking that we do. We are reacting, and our attention spans are limited or are reducing because we scroll from one LinkedIn or Facebook post to the next. They are limited because our screens provide us with very short excerpts of content before we move to the next scene, before the story moves on. So there's very little in media that allows a deep character development. As if you were reading a book, you often get a very deep understanding about the character. People, on average, and this is a generalization, often when we watch television or movies, they're very fast-paced and the scenes change very quickly. So very little time for analyzing human behavior or the motives of why someone is doing something. So we need to find time. Secondly, we also need to find new content. When we scroll through our social media, it presents us with what we like. It's found out what we like and it gives us more of the same. So we're doing convergent thinking rather than divergent thinking. One thing I used to say, and it's less true now, but it was certainly true in the past, and we can make it true today, is I used to, whenever I went to the doctor or to the dentist or to a location I didn't frequent, I used to sit there and read the magazines. And of course, when you go to the dentist has a whole collection of different magazines that you don't subscribe to. You get Women's Weekly, you get Dentist Monthly, you get a whole range of different topics, horse and hound, things that I'm not interested in, horses or dogs. But wow, how interesting. People are writing about how they train their dog, what they feed their horses, how they look after their gardens, what the current issues are in dentistry. And just by exposing myself, when I'm sitting there in the dentist waiting room, waiting for that appointment, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes half an hour, I can come across things that I've never even thought about, worlds that I've never thought about before. That is great exposure to new types of thinking. It's the same when I go to the library or to a charity bookshop. Sometimes it's fantastic just to pick up a book at random and read it. So when you're in the library, when you're in a bookshop, they sometimes sell you books in a wrapping that you don't know what's in there. They're like a mystery book. And I'll buy one of those and read it. Not read the first page and go, I'm not interested in Neanderthals and the development of the Neanderthal brain. What could that tell me about my own world? What could that tell me about how humans think and feel now? Dentistry. What can that tell me about how dental practices are operating that would be useful for my work with clients? So exposure to new ideas, controversial thinking, new thinking areas of practice outside of our own will help out the quality of our thinking, because they develop our own curiosity, stimulate thinking in new directions. And the third thing for me is to think critically about what I'm exposing myself to. So we often take the information that I'm given. And in social media, we know that not all Donald Trump's posts are true. And that's probably true for many other posts, that we should always have a curious mind. Why did this person post this information? What's their purpose? Why did they post it now? What's the alternative view? What facts or evidence support the claims that they are making? And too often, I think that we have become lazy in our thinking to accept that all versions of the truth, as they're claimed to be, have equal value. But as I say that statement, you as the listener are recognizing that cannot be true. There is a truth and there are opinions which may be untrue, or maybe less true, or maybe completely untrue. But only when we start to interrogate those to understand the motives of why the person has told their story in the way they have, starts to unravel human behavior and gives us a more critical perspective on this. Why has this article been published in this magazine this month rather than last month or next month? Well, because this is a hot topic. So as an academic, there are particular research topics that are very, very popular. If you send them in, you know that your chances of being published. COVID-19 a year ago was an example of this. You did a study around COVID-19. Your chances of being published will be significantly increased compared to a different topic. And there are other topics that go in waves. They're fashionable, they're curious. People will, so the editors believe, be interested in reading this. And so instead say, okay, what does that tell me about what's going on now? And that curious mind, that critical mind, is what we also need to develop alongside that aspect of opening our mind up to areas of practice, areas of ideas, contributions that we don't come across, and making the time to allow ourselves to think to think critically, to engage with that new material?
That's a really interesting question. So I think there's something organic, there's something innate about the ability to think. And there's also something learned. Yeah. So I think that thinking is fundamentally a product of curiosity. Yeah. So, like, I had a friend who used to take apart everything, toys. Like when he was a little kid, his parents would give him a toy and he would take it apart. Right. And the parents would be upset because he's ruining the toy. But what he was doing is he was taking apart the toy to see how it worked. And he ended up becoming an engineer. Right. So I think that there's something innate that drives us to think a certain way, that's fueled by curiosity. So I think what helps me is this sense of curiosity. And, you know, I'm not going to miss an opportunity to say data analytics, to say data, because that's where I come from. I mean, I'll share with you that we are now having an election in the United States. And there's a lot of tension between the Republicans and the Democrats. And the Republicans want you to think a certain way. They want you to be afraid. They want to fund the police. They want stronger laws against crime, right? We played this game like in the mid 80s, and this concept on focusing on crimes and criminals did not help this country. It actually hurt this country. But that's the message. The message is crime, inflation, right? And civil liberties. Those are the three themes. And the Republicans are saying tough on crime, no bail, right? But if you look at the data, the communities where they had bail reform actually had better outcomes because we released people so that they could fix their lives, so that they could pay their debt to society, instead of being locked up in jail until your trial, where you just get more in debt, right? And your family, you can't go back to your job, your families suffer, and when families suffer, communities suffer. And so the Republicans want you to think that you should be tough on crime, but being tough on crime actually is deleterious. It hurts communities. And they're telling you a story without showing you the data. And if you actually look at the data, it's the other way. You should be less tough on bail. You should let people go back to work. I mean, I'm not saying if somebody, you know, shoots somebody, right? Somebody kills somebody. I'm not talking about that kind of a violent crime. I'm talking about, you know, civil crime, not, you know, not bodily crime, not when you're killing somebody. But if somebody steals something from somebody else, right? They put them in jail until their trial. And the trial can be a year. So you're destroying somebody's life and the people that depend on them. And then it goes downhill. So it's a long way to say, get data. Yeah, get data. Don't let somebody else influence your opinion by trusting them. Do your own research and get the data. And I'll give you another momism. My mother used to say, if you can't decide, if you can't make up your mind about something, it's because you simply don't have enough information. So if you are uncertain about what you should do, if you can't decide, should I do this or should I do that? It's because you simply don't have enough information. So go out and get more information. And the minute you have enough information, the answer will become very clear to you.
Yeah, well, my dad had even more influence than my mom, so there's a million of them, right? But I think probably the most important one is that every decision you make, no matter how much you think, you can hide from those decisions. Those decisions appear in your mirror every day. And I think for me, you know, integrity is what you do when no one else is around. And I think for my father, it was, you can't hide from your choices. And I think there are a lot of people who try to, you know, who live lives where they don't show the fullness of who they are. So it was helpful when my dad realized there's no hiding, and never do anything you don't want to see in the newspaper or on the evening news, because though you think you're smart enough to get around it, it still lives in you.
Beautiful. The last question, travel time with me one more time, okay? It seems like you have another meeting, right? So I want to keep it quick. If you travel time with me and meeting the young little kid, Joseph, and then you tell him about the future journey that he's going to have, what is the one thing that you're going to tell him?
Don't be as scared about the future. The future will be wonderfully beautiful. I would really want, because I think when you're really young, you just don't know how you're going to navigate all of this stuff. And I think I probably had some of those fears early on. But more importantly, just enjoy it more and give yourself a little more time to savor and a little less time to reach. So I wish I'd have taken a few of those more moments along the way, and I'd like to have him think about that so that he doesn't just rush past some of the most beautiful moments of his life.
So a few years ago, I decided to do a race across America solo. You know, it takes years of training. So at least 5 years of training for this particular race, because it is so hard. So to give you some details about the race so that you have an understanding what the challenges are, it's you have less than 12 days for those 5,000 kilometers. I finished it in 11 days and 5 hours, and that means per day on average 432 kilometers on your bike. 3,400 meters of climbing, about 15,000 calories burned every day, and every day on average about 2 hours of sleep only, more than 20 hours on your bike per day. So this is Race Across America. This is the challenge. And you know, it's very similar to some business and life challenges. You have a very tough long-term goal. You have to work very long. You have to train a lot to achieve this goal. And you have to motivate yourself during that time. And this is very similar to many business problems. You need to establish a goal, to set a goal. You have to develop the discipline to work hard to achieve this goal. And you know what? I think most people that are healthy can do Race Across America. Absolutely no problem. If they are excited about this goal, this objective, if they develop the willpower to do everything that is needed to achieve this objective, and if they surround themselves with the right people that support you to achieve this goal. So it's all about the mindset. So if you have the right mindset, everyone can achieve the impossible. If you can dream it, you can do it.
So since you're an expert on that, and you already also a demonstrator of the high performance mindset yourself, define high performance mindset for us, would you?
You know, high performance sometimes has a negative connotation. because very often it is associated with a burnout, etc. For me, a high performer is every person that achieves something he did not believe that he could achieve. So if you set a stretch goal, something that is beyond what you believe you can do it, and you can achieve it, you are a high performer in my view.
I was just really lonely. I was just really lonely, and I wanted to not be lonely anymore. And I'm still an introvert. So even though I know much better how to make friends and bring people into collaborations and projects and spread great ideas, I didn't change my personality at all. I love reading and spending time by myself and talking with people one-on-one. And I'd love to talk a little bit about behavioral introversion and extroversion, because I think that can be helpful for leaders if we can in a bit. But I was honestly just desperately lonely, and I was also experiencing shame for being lonely. So a combination of loneliness and shame, embarrassment that I didn't have as many friends as I wanted to have, and I would know that other people were getting invited to do things, and I wasn't. I was even embarrassed and ashamed with my parents, and I remember I didn't want my parents to know that I wasn't being invited to do things like other people were, and I remember that sometimes I would pretend to be on the phone with a friend just so that my dad would hear and think that I had more friends than I had. And I also remember when I learned to drive and I was in high school and I would get to borrow a car, there were times that I would pretend that I was going out to a party and I would just go drive around by myself so that my parents would think that I had friends. So I wasn't just a nerd, I was kind of a weirdo and sort of pathological. It's not that everybody hated me. I did have some friends, but I felt a lot of social pain, and the social pain was enough to motivate me to try to get out of it. And the biggest thing that I learned, which started in high school but then has continued throughout my life since then, was that there's a really simple solution for not being invited to do things and socially and in collaborations, which is that you invite other people. So as soon as this shifted to me realizing that I could invite other people to do things, then I went from being an introverted, shy, relatively lonely person to being someone who had the same personality but was perceived as being a leader socially and in other types of extracurricular situations and academic projects, just because I was inviting people. And it turned out that so many of us are kind of shy on the inside, maybe not as pathological as I was, but there are so many people who would love to be invited. And it's not like most people are getting invited all the time. So I was into theater, and so I started, rather than auditioning all the time and being, usually you get rejected, but if you're directing a project, then you get to choose other people and invite them. And I started a volunteer club in my high school, and I would be inviting other people to go do volunteer projects. And on the weekends, I would be researching to find out what kinds of events were going on in our town. And then I would be inviting everybody. I organized a class camping trip and invited everyone in my class. So because I had been lonely, the things that I was inviting people to do were very inclusive, and it was always open to everybody. And so we would have people like, the athletes and the popular kids and the theater nerds and the computer nerds and people from different grades and different ages. And it just turned out to go really well. And so that's the spirit that I brought to college and the workplace. And now even when I had this book come out in 2022, I was very lonely and I was very scared in the process. And so I started a group of people like me who are behavioral scientists publishing books for the world, who are all lonely and scared. And we meet every month and we talk and we help each other. We give each other advice, and it's sort of like a therapy group. In research, I've started a bunch of research groups to bring people together to not be so lonely when we do research. So this is the most helpful thing for me.
I disagree with your premise. I think intuition is, we see it all the time. It's very natural. That's how babies learn. That's how we're absorbing things. I think intuition without critical thinking leads to very poor acquisition of information. So I think we're all intuitively absorbing information, but we can facilitate that, I think, in two ways. One, being curious. That means getting outside your bubble, getting outside your comfort zone. And then the second is then thinking critically about it. So I gave a guest lecture today at class. Can I use one semi-bad word? Would you be offended?
Anything, use anything, please.
Okay, so I asked, the students are very nice students, and they are shy and they don't want to ask a question after I've given my little talk, which was on happiness, by the way, the topic of my new book. And I said, what's the most important word in science? And they said, oh, experiment, hypothesis. I said, no, I think the most important word is the word bullshit, right? Science is a systematic way to get rid of bullshit. By that I mean, you've got to think critically, right? If we run an experiment, it's very transparent what we did, what we didn't do, what it means and what doesn't mean. And so that's that kind of application. So I think if we think of this, if you will, BS detector in our heads, that is what moves us from pure intuition, being curious about something and, you know, having a superficial understanding of it, into now creating actually information that I can do something with. I've got to be critical about that thing. And it's not natural, by the way, sorry to cut you off. I think most people struggle with critical thinking because it's very cognitively expensive in our brains to break it down. And the other reason that critical thinking is sometimes avoided is that to be critical means you also have to disagree. And if I disagree with you, you might think I'm a disagreeable person. You don't want to be around someone who's disagreeable and a nasty human being. But if you can disagree in a way that is constructive, that is where we start to develop that knowledge. And so for the friends I have and the friends who I'm friends with, they want me to disagree with them, right? I want them to disagree with me. Science is all about disagreement, right? We only discover new things because the old stuff didn't work and we didn't like the way that experiment was done, and we thought the results were, you know, random. So I think we have to have the confidence to disagree with what other people are saying, to begin to be on that path to developing wisdom. And it's a little bit scary.
I'm laughing a little bit because I'm not sure if you want to spend a day in my mind because I'm always thinking. But what I'll say is that's a really big differentiator is curiosity. I see, you know, curiosity is kind of this wonderful trait that leads to a lot of perhaps even thinking, and then it leads to action, right? So I would say it's not just about your mindset. It's about like what you want to do with some of these questions that are coming up. So I've talked to people who they think about something. That's like, I wonder why this is happening. And then they don't even bother to explore that anymore, right? They're just like, that's just the way it is, right? And what I want to encourage people to do is get beyond that and say, well, why is that the way it is, right? And then get curious about it and learn about that and then see, well, okay, if I'm not really satisfied with the answer, how do I change? You know, or what's within my power. And so one of the things that I talk about, you know, with my clients as well as in my book is that everybody thinks that the problems of the world are too big, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that you as an individual are going to make that change, you know, but who else can you work with to be able to drive positive change, right, in the world around us? And I think that you realize that the world, especially since, you know, you and I are in two different parts of the world, right? But the fact that we're talking and we have the communications and the technology and the ability to connect like this. I mean, imagine if many of us, like, we're all starting to get curious about these challenges and get together. Why not, right? Why not? We can do this.
Yeah, so I'm a very religious individual. So I grew up with a lot of religious texts, Jewish religious texts, and I was always fascinated by the way that logical systems work in the Jewish texts. As you delve deeper into it, you can take a certain sentence and a certain phrase and a certain piece of wisdom, if we're talking about wisdom, and analyze it in so many different ways and get new insights. But as long as you have rules in order to get there, if you don't have rules, then anything goes, and then it's really haphazard, and it's really difficult to understand what's going on when there are no rules. And so I always found it fascinating that there are rules, there are logical patterns to help you get to better understanding and to better knowledge. And I wanted to investigate those. I wanted to really become more expert in understanding those logics and helping others also do it.
So how could that link to psychology? If it could be literature, it could be, you know, like statistics, it could be mathematics, right? So why psychology?
Yes. Because I think that when we talk about psychology, I know that usually when people talk about psychology, they think about what's called in the world of psychology clinical psychology, or when I was studying in my bachelor's degree, it was called abnormal psychology, in fact. How people think wrong, what are the problems that happen in people's brains. But psychology to me is just really about how people think. And it's an overarching element in all of those fields that you just discussed. In literature, you have to learn to analyze literary texts, right? And in order to learn to analyze that, you have to have some sort of introspection of how your brain works, how you perceive texts, how do you read texts, where are the obstacles, how will you misinterpret texts if you don't have the right approach. And so I wanted to take that step even further back and understand the logic behind all those analysis, all those more analytical fields, and really see how that also interacts and intermingles with biology, which has also been a passion for me for many years. I really love biology. My daughter now loves biology also. She's studying biology. But I always wanted to see how the brain interacts with the mind, how logic interacts with the physiology. And that was also a unique element of psychology that I found.
Beautiful. And in the world where people easily lost track of their interest, right? You've been doing this. You've been loving that since you were young, and have been doing this for 25 plus years and many years more to come. So tell us, where did you find the strength to focus and not being distracted by so many other things that possibly your professors then could, do and get better at?
Yeah. I think that it's just a personality trait. I think that from my perspective, I think that it's always more worthwhile to become knowledgeable, deep knowledge in something than basic knowledge in many things. So it's not like I don't have a lot of hobbies and I'm not interested in other areas. Actually, in fact, that's what I really love about my job of being an innovation consultant, because I take a methodology and help people think better in their area of expertise. The other side is that they help me understand their areas of expertise. So I actually have a very broad knowledge base, a very basic information of almost anything that exists in the world. So that's one of the things that I really enjoy. But I think that in order to really have an impact in the world, and what makes me happy is to really have strong expertise in one area, to become the world expert perhaps in one thing. That really appeals to me, rather than getting distracted and becoming somewhat of an expert in many things.
I mean, I would tell him that I have been really lucky, being now 71 years old. I have been really lucky to get all the opportunities, because has been some good circumstances in my life that I got the opportunity to work at the university and really develop young people in that way, and having the chance to work very freely, because I think this is also part of being a professor at the university, that you can develop new ideas which nobody had before, and you are getting the freedom to do so. And I would tell this young Reinhard that from my perspective now, as being 71 years old, I have been really happy and lucky that I got all these opportunities. And so I'm very, very grateful to be able to lead this kind of life, which I haven't thought when you were young at that time, being 25, because my situation was very unclear at that time. So, or if I would talk to this young Reinhard, I would see, I can see that you are on your way, you are trying to find your way, but now time has shown that you have been very lucky if you see yourself many years later. But I think it's also this not knowing things is also important. If I would have known that my path would go like this, maybe I wouldn't have the strength to develop in this direction. I think this insecurity and this not knowing is also one of the drivers to develop something in a way which shows up to be a very lucky situation for your life, and I'm more than grateful for being able to having led this life.
What I've learned about how to think better is from the work I've done is number one, you should assume that well, let me put it in the first person. I should assume that I have biases, that I don't, that my experience do not give me a window onto all how to understand everything in the world, and so and there is such a thing as cultural bias that everybody has, a kind of an ethnocentric bias based on where you are, and beyond that. You should assume that you have other biases. I should assume I have other biases. And a key element is what assumptions do I make that I don't think about, but some of these assumptions I picked up from the culture around me. Some of them I picked up from my own experience. But identifying what assumptions are being made that are not being recognized is very important. And the studies, there's this other line of research I've done with where we looked at ism concepts, what words that end in ism in a lot of languages or something equivalent to that. And we did lexical studies with that. And what we get when we do studies on that is basically a laying out of all the belief assumptions that people have. And that again helps you kind of realize which particular assumptions you adopt and which ones you don't, but which may be adopted by other people. So I think that's a kind of a key element of critical thinking, is identifying biases and underlying assumptions. And the research that I've done has actually kind of put me on a path of becoming more sensitive to those, to recognizing biases and assumptions like that.